Hello there, and welcome back. My name is Sean Reimer, I don't rhyme, and apologies that it's been a while. I needed to take a break from things for a little bit. Lately, my life has been similar to Peter Parker's in Spider-Man 2. So I've been doing what he did. I've been taking care of myself mentally, spending time with my girlfriend Lexa, making sure I'm doing good at work, and also detoxing from THC and alcohol. Spider-Man 2 told me that it's okay to take a step back and change some things about your life. And it's no secret that it's one of my favorite films of all time. I love all the Spider-Man films, some more than others, but Sam Raimi's Trilogy stands above them all. I love the MCU's John Hughes tone and how they clash Peter Parker's Avengers and high school worlds. I love the slickness of the Mark Webb films and Andrew Garfield's unique portrayal of Spider-Man. I was honestly going to write an essay about how much I love each adaptation, but then the part about the Sam Raimi films became its own essay because of how long it was. Where do I start? I love Danny Elfman's score, I love how adorable Tobey's Peter is, and no, I'm not talking about his gentleman sausage. I love the side characters' memorability, but most of all, I love how human it makes this superhero, which was the entire point of Spider-Man in the first place. Sam Raimi's Trilogy has some incredible themes of responsibility, selflessness, and ego. Combine that with all the elements I mentioned before, and you have one of the best superhero trilogies of all time. No, the best superhero trilogy of all time. Comic book movies were in a weird place in the 2000s. Batman and Robin was too campy, X-Men took itself too seriously, and Daredevil was something. But the Sam Raimi Spider-Man films stand out because of how they embrace the comic book aesthetic while still having incredible themes that tie the movies together. Plus, I couldn't watch the first movie as a kid because of how much Willem Dafoe scared me, so there's that. The first film is naturally all about power and responsibility. The first third of that film beautifully sets this up by making us feel for Peter before he gets his powers. So when he does, we understand his recklessness and his abuse of it. The height of this recklessness comes after Uncle Ben's death when he unintentionally causes the death of his killer. This is when Peter remembers that with great power comes great responsibility, and sets forth to use that to help people. Norman Osborn is the man that Peter wants to be through most of the film. He's a scientist, he's rich, and he has power. But once Norman becomes the Goblin, he doesn't have an Uncle Ben moment tying his power to his responsibility. So he straight up murders multiple people in revenge and attempts to murder even more once Spider-Man gets in the way. This comes to a climax when Peter declares that the man he looks up to now is Uncle Ben. He even does the responsible and selfless act of letting MJ go, even though it's Spider-Man telling him to do this and not Peter himself. This leads us into Spider-Man 2 and selfishness versus selflessness. Now Peter is only listening to the Spider-Man part of himself. It shows the flip side of Uncle Ben's proverb and how damaging it can become. Peter has to deliver pizzas and he chooses to save kids, so Peter gets fired. He's on his way to MJ's play but needs to stop some cliche criminals, so Bruce Campbell cockblocks him and MJ officially moves on. Peter is being so selfless in his life as Spider-Man that his powers fail because of how much he's being shit on. Not to mention things that are out of his control being heightened due to how depressed he is, like Aunt May losing her house or Harry straight up hating him. He looks at his idol Dr. Octavius and the success that he's had by listening to what he wants. He has his wife and he's about to create fusion. Peter realizes he needs a life of his own without Spider-Man, so he hangs up the suit. He decides to be selfish. And everyone has a negative connotation on that word, but it's good in moderation, like eating a hot dog in the park, or getting the education you want, or repairing relationships that you care about, as he does with MJ and Aunt May. It becomes too much when you're robbing banks and throwing old ladies off buildings, like how Otto's arms are manipulating his desires. The one area that hasn't been transformed in Peter's life is his love for MJ. And Aunt May gives him advice that I feel trumps Uncle Ben's, about giving up your dreams to do what's right. Peter wants to help people, but for him, as well as for his late uncle, he needs to let MJ go not to protect her, but for his own good. That's when his powers come back. After an amazing train sequence, he tells Otto the same thing his aunt told him. He needs to give up his dream of fusion so that millions of people won't die. Otto knows deep down that he does not want to die a monster. Too bad, they needed you in No Way Home somehow. So he's ultimately the one who saves New York, while MJ is the one who saves Peter. He's now gotten everything he wants. But there's a problem with getting everything you want. You get confident, overly confident. You become arrogant. You end up wanting even more, and you get an ego. This leads us into Spider-Man 3, and spoiler, I love this movie as much as the first two. Spider-Man 2 took a beaten Peter Parker and built him into a man. Spider-Man 3 takes that man and inflates his ego to where it's annoying. New York loves him. He's getting the key to the city. He's gonna propose to MJ. He's got a steady job, I think. And he's doing great in school. But he's become far too confident to where he's practically having an affair with a girl in his class. He's neglecting MJ, and he's actively quipping too much on the job.
I don't want to hurt you. Leave now.
I guess you haven't heard. I'm the sheriff around these parts.
Okay.
Uh-oh.
Now enter the black suit, which amplifies everything about Peter. His want for revenge against his uncle's real killer. His awkward memeability. You gotta remember how much of a dork he was before the black suit to understand emo Peter. But most importantly, his ego. Once he gets the black suit, you actively hope someone beats up that kid we were rooting for in Spider-Man 2. But it's Peter who causes his downfall. He murders Sandman contrary to what his aunt wants. He blows up his best friend because he can. He straight up uses Gwen Stacy to get back at MJ and then proceeds to hit MJ.
I hit her!
That's right. Peter Parker hits Mary Jane Watson. This is rock fucking bottom. His ego is gone. He's now in an even worse spot than he was in the previous film. Peter must set aside his ego of being Spider-Man to be Spider-Man. Just like how Harry must set aside his ego of being a perfect Osborn, like his very imperfect father, to save MJ with Peter. How ironic is it that he dies by his own glider, but in sacrifice, instead of attempted murder? In the end, as with the end of all these movies, our heroes are victorious, but forever changed. The mark of brilliant writing, and showcased beautifully by Sam Raimi with his incredible eye for detail. Through his wacky transitions and incredible use of practical effects, Sam took a character that cameoed on the Electric Company and fought monsters in a Megazord, and made him stick to our hearts, like bad guys on a web. On that wonderful note, it's time to end. Thank you very much for watching. Good night.